Hi guys, I'm here with Diego Zaldívar, who's the CEO of Rootstock. Diego, welcome to Singapore.
Thank you for having me here.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about your background. You're from South America. You've been in the cryptocurrency space for quite a while. Could you give us a quick rundown of how you got into this space and what you've been up to?
Yes. Well, I've been into the tech space, into the internet space for many, many years. I was one of the pioneers of the web back in 1995. I launched the website for the main newspaper in Argentina.
Okay.
So I lived the full .com revolution from the beginning to the boom and bust.
Yeah.
So in 2011, I got in touch in Bitcoin, but the truth is I didn't get it. It's like, it took me some, I understood it was digital money, but I didn't understood the depth of what Bitcoin implied.
Yeah.
And in 2012, a very good friend of mine called me all excited about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And we did something that was very difficult to do back then. He was in Silicon Valley, I was in Buenos Aires. We had capital control, so it was almost impossible to get money in and out of the country. And he sent me the equivalent of, $50,000 in Bitcoin to my account, which I just opened without asking permission to anybody. And then I sent the money back to him, all within an hour. And when I saw that, I say, okay, wow, this is
that's powerful.
Yes, very powerful. This is how a global financial system should work.
Yeah.
It's so after that, I decided to revisit Bitcoin, and I was reading, almost non-sleeping for 15 days about everything, like the technology, macroeconomics, because I come from a tech background, so I wanted to understand also the financial aspects or the economic aspects of Bitcoin. So I had to read how the financial system of the world worked.
Yeah.
So it was quite an interesting process. And after that, I decided I was going to devote my life into it.
Sure.
And I did. Yeah. And well, the first thing I did is I started building grassroots movements for Bitcoin, first in Argentina and then in the whole region, and now we have 9-10 communities in different countries in Latin America.
I think it's been quite a journey. And then Rootstock came about in, I think, 2015. Could you describe what Rootstock is?
Yes.
And what you guys are trying to do, or what you're still trying to do it? So
yes. The end game or the final goal is still not mature. Is maturing.
Sure.
Yeah. But in the process of learning about Bitcoin and creating the communities, I realized that I wanted to have, one goal, one purpose for the technology. So I was looking for that purpose. And when I was 9 years old, I started going to the slums in Buenos Aires with my mother. So I was very close to financial exclusion and how the poor places in the world were. So I decided that I wanted to use these technologies to solve financial inclusion.
Sure.
So to solve financial exclusion, to create finance. And on that process, I realized that Bitcoin alone was not enough, that we needed smart contracts, that we needed the representation of the local currency on-chain, on a decentralized system. Ethereum was announced in January 2014. I was at the North American Bitcoin Conference and I saw the pitch. But my feeling was that creating a new infrastructure from scratch and a new currency was going to take a long time before it was mature and safe enough. So I said, why don't we bring smart contracts into Bitcoin?
Sure.
So we use the Bitcoin infrastructure, we use the acceptance of the currency, and that's how I reached out to Sergio Lerner. He was the first one to create a Turing complete smart contract.
Him,
Yes.
Yeah, and seen some of his interviews, read some of his stuff. Yeah.
So we spoke in October 2014 after a talk I had with Nick Szabo about the topic.
Yeah.
And 9 months later, our teams joined, and that's when Rootstock was born.
Super interesting. Before we go ahead, Mel, could you help us check if it's all good? It's okay. We can edit this out or keep it in. It's fine. It's all good. All right.
Excellent.
Because I recently had an incident where with I don't know if you know Jack Liu he was with Kraken so we recorded a really nice podcast for about an hour and a half, and then I lost the entire footage.
No.
Okay. It was
wow.
the first time in a year that was happening. But anyway, so I mean, at least in my mind, what Rootstock is, and I think you alluded to some part of this. So you've got the Bitcoin blockchain, and then Rootstock is kind of like a side chain,
yes.
kind of mirroring the Bitcoin blockchain, but you have some additional capabilities
yes.
to add smart contracts on it. And then as far as the currency for this new network, for Rootstock goes, you've kind of mirrored
yes.
What you call a smart Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right. Could you talk like very quickly in terms of how you kind of, in your words, how you kind of describe
how it works? Yeah. It's our vision was like, we decided we wanted the same functionalities as Ethereum had. We also realized that Ethereum created an amazing developers community, so we wanted to leverage on that. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel or start everything from scratch because we need to reach mass adoption. It's like if we join forces, we can do something much bigger.
Sure.
So on that side, on the developer side, we wanted to be fully compatible with Ethereum, but we wanted to leverage on the Bitcoin infrastructure. So what we did is we created a merge mining mechanism where Bitcoin miners with the same hashing power, the same infrastructure, could protect two blockchains at the same time. And then on top of that, as we wanted to have full alignment with the Bitcoin ecosystem, instead of minting a new currency, what we did is we created a two-way peg, what you mentioned, a sidechain, to Bitcoin in a way where each new coin in our blockchain needed to be pegged one-on-one with one Bitcoin. So the only way you can get smart Bitcoins is by locking a Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network. So we created those two things, like a merge mining mechanism and a sidechain or a two-way pair with Bitcoin, which was the first one to go live. We were the first productive sidechain to Bitcoin. And that was it. It was like the combination of the Ethereum capabilities with the power of the Bitcoin network and the acceptance of the Bitcoin currency.
Yeah. And so just to get a little bit deeper into merge mining, so the rewards, how do the mining rewards work for merge mining? Like do the miners get compensated for the transactions happening in Rootstock?
Yes, there's no minting of new currencies.
Right, so there's no subsidy.
Coins, so there's no subsidy. So miners get rewarded only by processing transactions.
Right.
And smart contracts, of course. No?
Yeah. So one of the things that I mentioned in your updated white paper is that, so I mean, next year is a significant event for Bitcoin where the block rewards go into half again, which happens every 4 years for some of our audience members who may not know that. And so next year onwards, the rewards will be 6.25 BTC for every block that is mined.
Yes.
And currently it's 12.5. And so you've mentioned that is obviously a problem because there are less and less miners who will be incentivized to still mine Bitcoin. Bitcoin mining will essentially become less profitable. And then Rootstock kind of comes in and it solves some of the problems.
Yes, because Bitcoin has, I would say, there's two use cases where Bitcoin has dominated among the cryptocurrency space. One is, and I would say that's also, a use case that dominates the space in the world, that is remittances.
Sure.
Bitcoin is the best remittance network in the world. You can send any amount of money from any point in the world to any point in the world and pay 25 cents USD.
Yeah.
So that's already an achievement. And then, the more questionable store of value, although if you take any 3 years within Bitcoin, you always will have more value. So I would say that for mid to long term, Bitcoin is proving to be very reliable. So it's taking that place of a digital gold, if you will. So that's okay, but that can bring you so many transactions. So we think that RSK enables the Bitcoin ecosystem to bring a lot of other use cases that don't necessarily have to do with those two use cases. So now we can use RSK as a payment system. We can represent the currencies of nations. We can represent titles of land or any type of ownership. So when you put all those use cases together, then you can create a transactional throughput or demand that is is not necessarily needed for remittances or store of value, which are low transactions. So we think in that way we create like, a multi-layer system that is more sustainable. Because suddenly in Bitcoin will remain as a store of value, will remain as the remittance network for certain amounts of value, and then RSK will be used for lower transaction values and for other use cases that were not possible in Bitcoin.
Micropayments and things like that.
Yes, I think for micropayments we are launching the off-chain network, peer-to-peer payment network. But you would say, like, I don't know, if I want to pay $100, I'd rather go to RSK than Bitcoin in the future.
Got it. And so, I think Bitcoin is sort of, at least within the crypto community, sort of become a religion, and people really don't question the long-term viability of Bitcoin. So, I know we're talking about RSK, but a quick question about Bitcoin itself. You keep mentioning that, Rootstock kind of augments or adds on to the face that the miners get through this concept of merge mining. Do you think Bitcoin itself is not doing that well if it's so reliant on the subsidy or the block rewards?
Well, that's definitely a challenge for Bitcoin, because the subsidy is what took us here. Of course, when the subsidy goes out, what happens is transaction fees go up. As long as the demand on the network.
But if they go up too much, then the demand goes down, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's always like this look for this search for equilibrium between the transactional cost, the Bitcoin, the capacity of the network. So that's a challenge, and this has been studied since 2012. It's not a new topic. There are papers that analyze this in depth, and we knew this. We knew that the Bitcoin transaction cost was going up. So that's why RSK was also a solution to have like a medium security layer that had like lower transactional costs and more throughput, because that's the other thing that we did in RSK. Transactions are settled every 30 seconds, and you can process 100 transactions per second. And in the future, we will be able to process maybe 2,000 transactions per second on chain. So, we knew that we needed this balance. So that's why I think it's very important for Bitcoin to be sustainable, that we add all these other use cases secured by the same infrastructure network. It's also a way of protecting the Bitcoin future. But I agree.
So going back to Rootstock, I have a couple of more follow-up questions, but I want to make sure that this interview doesn't become too long. So you mentioned that RSK has capabilities to run business logic essentially, and so you can build applications on top of RSK.
Correct.
Could you talk a little bit about what are some of the applications that are currently running on RSK?
Yes, we have some applications that had to do with social impact. So they basically are transparent donations, and we have some applications that had to do with financial inclusion, which is at the core of our purpose. We as an organization are looking specifically to enable financial inclusion. And then we have some use cases that are more related to certain verticals, some industries like logistics or traceability of food. And so we are working with some governments, for example, on creating traceability for organic producers. So it's different. We are working on different verticals, if you will, that where we think these technologies can be used. One element, the financial inclusion pilot that we are running together with the Inter-American Development Bank and the Bitcoin Argentina NGO and Accenture, is one where we are testing multiple things at once. We are testing the issuance of a local currency. We are testing the creation of identities based on reputation. So I think that would be a very interesting pilot case to see how these technologies can really improve society. And then there are other spaces that we are exploring, like gaming. We have some games running on RSK where you tokenize the digital assets. So it's very wide, if you will. Loyalty programs. We have some applications running around loyalty programs, which are uses that are more, if you want, they create incremental value. They are just optimizations of traditional models. In the case of financial inclusion, it's something that nobody could solved until now, and I think we have the key to unlock that problem.
Yeah. So I think in general, I mean, and I might be wrong, but I think the general sense of the audience that I have is that a lot of people are familiar with some of these applications,
yes.
All the applications that you mentioned.
Yes.
But more in the Ethereum ecosystem, more so than, and again, now there are multiple blockchains that have sprung up, and they all have very similar kind of applications being built, but people are not as familiar with some of the applications in other ecosystems. Or maybe it's my bias. Maybe I'm too much into the Ethereum ecosystem.
No, I think it's right. I mean, Ethereum was the first mover, so the first mover advantage. I mean, we catch up in terms of technology, but in terms of adoption, they are still leading the way. And there are other platforms like EOS that are trying to catch up as well. At the end, I think this race will be win, not only with technology, but also, capturing the developers, because today developing solutions on the current blockchains is very, very difficult. Even expert and seasoned developers have a hard time creating the first decentralized application. So we are, and everybody is reinventing the wheels. Everybody is creating the wallet from scratch. Everybody is so I think part of our vision is we are creating libraries to simplify the use of these technologies. We need to make the use of decentralized infrastructure so easy that even a non-blockchain expert developer can use it. Then is when those developers that know the industries will start building creative solutions using our technology. So I think the race will be around that, is who will be the first to create tools that are simple for developers to use, so developers can create instead of fighting technology. Now, most developers in the blockchain space fight technology. It's not that they are using the technology for creative efforts, but they are just reinventing things from scratch.
And I think that's a good transition into RIF as well. And so I guess that's what your vision, or that's what your objective is with RIF as well, right? To make it simpler for the developers, and you kind of have integrated solutions. The 3 or 4 or 5 things that you offer within RIF.
That's correct, because RIF is 2 things. If you want, you could split it in 2. RIF is, in our vision, we talk always about the Internet of Value, because we think what we are building is a network of networks for the transfer of value, and transfer and agreements and everything related to manage value for human beings. And in that sense, layer 1 for us is Bitcoin, layer 2 is RSK, and now we are creating layer 3, that is RIF, that is the peer-to-peer layer. And on top of that, the other component that RIF has is a set of libraries. So it's 4 layers. In a way, it mimics the OSI model, where you have the protocols, the transport protocols, or in this case, is a store of value protocols, the agreement protocols, the infrastructure, or the peer-to-peer protocols, and then you have the application layer or the libraries layer where applications are built. So that's a multi-layer approach that we have been chasing since 2015. So in that sense, we didn't change much what we are looking for. We just go building layer after layer. And RIF, we created RIF because of this financial inclusion project. We started checking all the things that we needed to make that system viable. So we realized that we needed a way to have nicknames so people can transfer value easily. Because in the slums, most of the people using technology are not very tech savvy.
They're not going to check alphabets and numbers.
Exactly, that's impossible. So they need an alias. They can easily transfer money to their friends and family. So that's why RIF directory was born. Then we think that identities based on reputation are the key to unlock financial inclusion, because no matter how rich or how poor you were born, you always have a reputation. And if you can prove that reputation to others, creating attestations on the blockchain of all your interactions, then suddenly you have something of value that you can use as collateral to access to financial services, to trade with others, to associate with others. So suddenly reputational identities are the core of enabling financial inclusion, and that data becomes so relevant that you don't want to be exposed to losing your phone and losing your whole reputational history. You need a decentralized data storage where you can back up your sensitive data. So RIF data and so on. Like each component, RIF payments, that is the off-chain payment layer, enable us to scale maybe 50 times what we have on chain. So now we have 100 transactions per second on chain. With this, we can reach 5,000 transactions per second, which is more than enough to service 100 or 200 million people. So suddenly, and that lowers the transaction cost to a fraction of a cent. So that's very important also in the financial inclusion context. Transactional fees are key. So when you add up all the RIF components, they were designed to enable this financially inclusive ecosystem, which we say, okay, it's not the financial system only for those excluding our society. It's the financial system of the future because it's so efficient, so easy to use that it can be used in the more extreme places where resources are very limited. But if it can be used there, it can be used anywhere.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to make sure we haven't lost the audience. So,
yeah.
I mean, so whatever Diego spoke about, so things like he spoke about the naming service, he spoke about reputation. I think storage and data feeds are a couple of other functionalities within the RIF ecosystem. I mean, these are all projects that are being built in the Ethereum ecosystem as well as some of the other blockchains that are springing up as well. But I think what you're doing is kind of, instead of having the application interact with multiple different other applications, the base layer applications, you're sort of integrating all of these applications, things like storage and naming service, so that essentially the developer at the top layer, after these 4 layers that we spoke of, at the absolute top layer, can basically be more efficient and focus more on actual adoption and actual
and the business problem that they are solving.
Absolutely.
So that's the idea.
Instead of worrying about the tech.
Exactly. And one thing that is interesting is that RIF is designed as a protocol. We are building the first implementations of these protocols, but it will be an open protocol. So for example, I don't know, Filecoin is doing this in Ethereum, but if they want, they can plug into the RIF marketplace, and they can also offer services within that marketplace. So it's not that it's proprietary tech. It's like we are just creating the first version of each protocol because we want to give the developer that experience of a unified environment. But the systems are designed openly, so anybody can join either as a service provider or as a separate network that offers similar services, as long as they offer the same service level agreements and they accept RIF. It's not mandatory, but it's at least you need to accept it. You can use other currencies as well. As long as you accept it, you can be part of the RIF ecosystem. So it's an open ecosystem. And so the vision is that we want to prove the world that having everything under one roof with proper libraries, simple to use libraries, will trigger mass adoption of decentralized infrastructure.
I think as well. I mean, I think so as well. I think all the middleware that you're speaking about is kind of going to be abstracted across different blockchains.
Exactly.
I mean, and again, I think there are different topics that we could speak about in terms of how that impacts the layer one. But I think again, I can keep going on and on in terms of the questions that I have. One thing that was interesting for me is that within the RIF ecosystem, so within RSK, you decided not to create a new currency. You kind of mirror 1:1 bitcoins, and you call them smart bitcoins, which are pegged 1:1, like mentioned, in the RSK ecosystem. But within the RIF ecosystem, you have this new token. Why introduce that friction?
Well, I think you're right that it creates some friction. We think that RIF, it's a coordination. It's an asset that enables coordination mechanism. So the idea is that RIF the RIF service providers will lock RIF in order to participate in the RIF marketplace, and that acts as an insurance. And the idea was that this token needed to be portable to other smart contract platforms, because in the RSK platform, we are working, for example, on integrating RSK into non-smart contract platforms like Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, so we have been in talks with them. And in the RIF ecosystem, our idea is that these peer-to-peer infrastructure services will also be integrated into other smart contract platform. So the idea is that this RIF token will live in the future. We are working on a two-way peg with Ethereum. So the idea is that in the future, the RIF token will also be living in the Ethereum ecosystem or in the EOS ecosystem.
Right.
So for us, that layer 3 had a separate token enable us to offer a unified marketplace of infrastructure for all the smart contract platforms. Because this is part of our vision of building the Internet of Value. When you say Internet, you are meaning that you are thinking about network of networks. You are not thinking of a single network. You are thinking about multiple networks interconnected. So that's why RIF token was created in that way, to coordinate a decentralized marketplace for infrastructure and also to make it portable so we could offer this marketplace to multiple smart contract platforms at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned a couple of interesting things, a couple of interesting other non-smart contract blockchains, so Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin. I wanted to get your take very quickly on what you think of some of the forks of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin Cash, BSV, there's some other forks as well. What is your view on these forks and the Bitcoin community as a whole? You've obviously seen it evolve over a period of time. There's a lot of fighting. There's a lot of fighting going on within Ethereum now. What do you make of that?
Well, I think when people talk about scaling, some people or some organizations only focus on TPS, on how many transactions per second you can do. But the problem is that when you have a lot of transactions on-chain, information on-chain remains there forever. So if you process too many TPS, what happens is that your blockchain grows very fast. So that's not necessarily a problem, but that creates centralization by nature, because if you have a blockchain that grows, processes 400 transactions per second, then you have a blockchain that grows at 1 terabyte per year. So the thing is that you can do 100 transactions per second, but the problem is who is going to hold all that information? Who is going to create validation nodes that will have terabytes of data, to validate? So at the end, it's not only about capability, it's also about sustainability. That's why I think a multi-layered approach is much more sustainable in the long term. So it's like, and I think the Bitcoin layer took that to an extreme. It's like they say, okay, I don't want to increase the block size. I want to even compress and keep it like, that's why even after 10 years, the Bitcoin blockchain is only 200 gigabytes. While other blockchains are in the terabyte space already with, 2-3 years of existence. So I think, Bitcoin took that to extreme. We are in between, although we are doing a lot of on-chain optimizations. We are compressing our blockchain a lot because we have this in mind. And then with off-chain payments, what you enable is that you don't need, for example, your Starbucks coffee to be recorded for the human history. I mean, why you want to have there's no need for that. You can do it, but you don't need to do that.
Sure.
So at the end, off-chain enables you to have the best of both worlds. Is your balances are updated and are safe, so the amount of money that you have will be protected, but the detailed information of the transaction is only saved by the parties that are involved in the party, by Starbucks and by myself, if that's the case. So that's my approach, but I'm not saying with these that the other approaches are wrong. Maybe Bitcoin Cash, for example, ends up being validated by the merchants that use the network and the miners. So it will have a few hundred nodes or a few thousand nodes if it grows, and that's okay. That's much better than the financial system that we have today that is completely opaque. In this case, we will have a financial system that we can check, that we will see. So I'm not against it. I think all these are, step forward in the evolution of the financial system. Although I have, of course, my own point of view. Or RSK, RIF, we have our own point of view, and we are chasing that point of view. But that doesn't invalidate the other approaches.
Absolutely. Now, a final question before we wrap up. So our podcast is called Decrypt Asia. Asia is very important for us in general, and I think a lot of people in the cryptocurrency ecosystem are also realizing the importance of Asia. I think Rootstock is a little bit unique in the sense that instead of originating in New
the
York,
US, yes.
in the US, or in a developed country, you kind of originated in a place
Yes.
which actually had a lot of the issues or the problems that this industry is trying to solve.
Yes.
And now you're expanding, which is great news as well. I
Yes.
wasn't aware of it, but you're opening up 2 new offices in Singapore and Shanghai.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about your experiences in South America, how that relates to some of the countries in this part of the world, and what you're trying to achieve
Yes.
in Asia, over the next couple of years or few
Yes.
years?
Well, for us, Asia is very important as well. I have been coming to Asia for the last 3 years,
Right.
like since early 2016, like 2-3 times, sometimes more per year.
Yeah.
Because I think it's like on one side, I see in Southeast Asia, I see a lot of connections with what we are living in Latin America, and you touch a point that for us is very important. We started building the technology because we wanted to solve a real problem from our societies. Like in Latin America, half of the population has no access to financial services. So we have half of our population excluded from our societies, and the same goes for Southeast Asia, Africa, India. So we are building technology with a purpose. So and that's why when you go to Latin America, you don't have to explain people why cryptocurrencies are important, because we have all the financial crises you can imagine. We have hyperinflation. Currently in Argentina, we have 45% inflation per year. We had capital controls in the past. We had bail-ins before Cyprus. We had the first bail-ins in 2001. So, I mean, for us, the technology is a tool to solve real needs. Maybe if you are in the first world, it's an incremental improvement. It's okay, but it's an incremental improvement. In our case, it's like an essential problem that we need to solve. So for us, technologies make a lot of sense. On the other side, I think East Asia also has huge potential in terms of like the amount of users are so big that you can test this in a different scale. So that's why we also are opening offices in Shanghai, because we want to explore with governments, corporations, how we can use this technology to scale it to millions of users. So in a way, for us, it's two-sided. Asia is very important for the size of it, for the economic size of the market, but also because we see an opportunity to see if our tests, our pilots in Latin America can be used in Southeast Asia, and we can help the situation out here as well.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. I mean, the vision that you have, and especially the kind of pain points that you're trying to address. I think that's where the need is. Like you said, I think in the developed world, it's an incremental improvement, or maybe not even an incremental improvement at the moment, at least. Maybe in the future.
You're right.
In the future, it would be. I mean, I said this was going to be the last question, but I just remembered a text message that I got from one of the co-hosts on the show, John Riggins.
Yes. I
and so
for many years.
I asked him if I should be asking you any questions, and he I think, were you a sailor in your previous life?
I was a sailor.
Yeah.
Well, I still consider myself a sailor.
Oh, really? So, I mean, he wanted me to ask you how that relates, how life as a sailor kind of helps you, or how that translates into the crypto ecosystem.
That's a nice question. Yeah. Well, I sail. My father took me on a sailboat when I was one month old.
Right.
And also, I crossed Atlantic once with friends. I've been in a couple very bad storms.
Right.
So one thing that you learn when you are, the captain of a boat, is that the rougher the weather is, the more calm you have to be. Yeah. It's like, I made some mistakes at sea that, I was lucky that they didn't cost my life, but they could. And those were because I rushed to solve problems in a moment of crisis. So what I learned, that was a very important lesson. I learned that the hardest the crisis, the deeper the crisis, the more calm you have to be. You have to quiet your mind, think thoughtfully of what you're going to do, and then execute. But I think in real life, sometimes it's not so clear when you have the crisis or not. But what you have to, you don't have crisis all the time. So you need to switch from, high execution, efficiency in moments of crisis, be thoughtful about what you're doing, into more collaborative working when in moments of peace, where you have the time to be more creative and use the collective intelligence. So I think for me the teaching was about that, about being able to switch your mind from one mindset to the other depending on the environment. No?
Right. I think that's probably one of the best. As I mentioned to you just before starting recording this podcast, so we run a fund, and I think as an investor,
yes.
I think you couldn't have given better advice. That's what was going through my mind. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show, Diego.
No, thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Likewise, my pleasure to be here, and thank you for hosting me.
Yeah.